Hey guys, I'm Mike Curtin. This is the Brew World Order podcast, and today I'm with Wayne Burns and Laura Worley, co-founders of Burns Family Artisan Ales in Denver, Colorado. Guys, thank you for being with me.
Absolutely.
How's it going?
Hello.
So, can you just give me a little bit of a background on how you guys got into the industry, where you grew up, all that good stuff?
Sure. There's sort of a two-part answer, I think, in terms of how we personally got into the industry, and then how our company, because we have been in the industry for a lot longer, excuse me, than our company has. I
Right.
started brewing professionally in the early '90s. I was a home
Okay.
brewer in the late '80s, and I went off to the Siebel Institute in Chicago, and that sort of thing. Worked for a place in Detroit, which is the area that we're from. And so that was how I got involved in the industry. And then in Laura's case, when we got to know each other about a dozen years ago, she, before long, got involved with me at a place that I was working at. And so she got involved about 10 years ago, along with me.
Yeah. So I apprenticed with him, essentially. I'm a professional chef as well. So um,
Right.
it
That,
was a little more natural to jump in to
sure.
professional brewing. So,
And then our company, Burns Family Artisan Ales, we were looking for an opportunity to do our own brewery under our own control. And we had been looking at that possibility for some time, but it's easier said than done. And we were patient.
For sure.
But
Okay.
eventually we were able to find enough parts to all come together that we were able to open our own place in Denver. We opened to the public in August of 2018, so almost
Right.
4 years ago at this point.
Gotcha. Well, from the moment when you guys finally decided to open your own place, from that inception of that idea to the moment you finally opened your doors, what do you think was the hardest part for you?
I would say funding.
sure.
I
Always is,
mean,
right? Cash flow.
yeah, a person who had been brewing for a living for nearly 30 years at that point, um, brewing as a career has an awful lot of great things about it. But one of the things that is rarely highlighted as a great thing is a very high rate of pay. Uh, so it becomes somewhat challenging if you want to accumulate some wealth and set yourself up with a nest egg, so to speak, out of which to invest and at least partially finance your own place. So for us, finding the necessary capital, I think under almost any circumstances, you're going to be looking at a minimum of a six-digit number to have
Right.
enough capital to start your place. And depending on what you're trying to do, could easily be a seven-digit number.
And then I think the other thing was, we were surprised by the fact that, Wayne could come into opening this business with, at that point, over 25 years of professional brewing experience and plenty of awards, and, you know, earned a reputation for himself, got himself the nickname of High Octane Wayne and things like that. And yeah, we felt had a lot of followers. And that was, part of what the marketing strategy was. It's like, here, we've got this guy.
Right.
And it didn't run. It walked for a while. So that was, I think, maybe more of a surprise than, but also a little bit more of a challenge, right? So,
Yeah, I think we definitely ran into a bit of a circumstance of, what have you done lately, and what has this company that you are at done lately? And of course, if it's a startup,
Right.
the answer is, well, nothing yet. And
Yeah, for
so
sure. Of
uh,
course.
folks were, I mean, there's a range, of course, but some of the customers thought it was really cool and were interested because of the amount of experience that we had. And I think it'd be fair to say the majority of our customers didn't really pay that much attention to that aspect and just said, "Oh, this is a new brewery," and then
Let's give them 6 months.
yeah, right. Hey,
Yeah,
let's give them 6 months before we go and
get
make
used to
sure
brewing.
they get used to brewing beer and that
Yep.
sort of thing, which of course was a little bit frustrating for us
Yeah.
because we were
Get
kind
the
of like,
kinks
well,
out.
we did that 25 years ago, but
Right.
it it was the reality that we experienced. So then you try to make it, well, okay. Ultimately, what we need to do is, produce a good product, provide good service, and a comfortable place at which to hang out and have some beer. And we were poised to do all of those things as well. We had just maybe hoped we could have hit the ground running a little bit more easily. Folks didn't quite jump on board that way. And okay, so then you just got to take a little time to build your own new brand and reputation on that. So that was a little bit of a
Gotcha.
surprise to us, but at this point now, we feel like we're very much, of course, COVID has made everything challenging, but we
Right.
are well along the way toward building that now.
Gotcha. And how did you go about finding the capital to fund your business?
Well, I think we did some pretty standard kinds of things. We reached out to family and friends, and we reached out to some banks to explore various options for a loan. And so we, over time, put together various pieces that way. So it was challenging. We weren't fortunate enough to have a bunch of capital ourselves, which of course always makes it easier to get things rolling. And
Right.
we weren't fortunate enough to have a lot of family and friends with a lot of money available to just say, "Oh, that sounds great. We think you'll do great. Here, I want to be a part of it." It
Right.
was a little more challenging than that for us. And, again, I think that's probably true for the majority of folks. Sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes you just have to kind of earn it little piece by little piece. And but ultimately, in terms of the ways that we did it, it was pretty standard. I think it would be safe to say.
And we also got
Gotcha.
lucky. We had been looking at a lot of places with real estate agents and things like that, and it got a notice from another brewing friend that a brewer was looking to, you know, sign over his lease to somebody and have someone take on, you know, purchase the majority of what was in there. So we got a turnkey brewery up to the point where we also had to get our own license. They were taking their license with them, so we couldn't just
Gotcha.
literally turnkey into the brewery. But because of that and the location and things like that, we were able to get in and get started with, you know, maybe a little bit less flash. You know, we didn't have one of those super cool all glass and all steel tap rooms, but we had a tap room and we had a place to
Right.
brew, and for us that was it, you
Yeah.
know, and at a price point that was a lot lower than a lot of people who are getting into the industry now.
Well,
So
Right.
yeah, and it allowed things to go much more quickly because the physical location already was a brewery with brewing equipment in it. So
Right.
all the utilities, electric, plumbing, gas, all that kind of stuff, brew kettles, fermenters, drains, all that stuff was there. And so we didn't have to go through what the vast majority of folks have to go through, that is a construction process. Once they say sign their lease for the place, then they've got to go through a construction process. And that, I mean, of course, it costs money, but it also costs time. And we were able to move through that clearly more quickly than we would have otherwise. So
Right.
that was, as Laura said, that was lucky for us.
Yeah, from what I hear, it's a huge headache going with all the permits and construction, and it's time consuming.
It's
So,
never easy.
you're right,
Never
for
easy.
sure.
I've been involved with the construction of several breweries over the
Right.
decades, and it's complex, challenging, often quite stressful.
Yeah,
And just there are a lot of things. You've got to not just get a bunch of construction done, but you've got to coordinate all these disparate uh, pieces of the picture, whether it's the equipment supplier, whether it's the electrical contractor, the plumbing contractor, the gas, and just on down the line, 101 different things. You got to get the right permits from your local
for sure.
municipality. All these things need to be done, and in theory, they can all flow smoothly together, and then most of the time, actually, reality happens, and
Right,
there are some challenges. So we
for
were able
sure.
to avoid a decent amount of those kinds of challenges, which was lovely.
Right. And speaking of stressful situations, you opened in 2018, August 2018, and then about a year and a half later, shutdowns occurred for COVID. How did you guys go about dealing with that? How did that affect your business? And what did you have to do to make it
Well,
work?
uh, it's COVID, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we were just at the point where we felt like we were doing that hockey stick takeoff thing. We finally figured out what our customers wanted and things like that. So that was it, we were feeling like we were in a really good spot, and yeah, we had, because we, like I said before, we kind of walked before we ran. We were at the point where a new employee was going to start. We got shut down on a Tuesday. They were supposed to start on Thursday. So Wayne and I had been bartenders and everything else for
Right.
a year and a half, and we're looking at, hey,
Yeah.
we might, not that we don't love our customers, we do, but might be able to step back from the bar and be able to focus on some other things for a hot second.
Right.
Yeah,
But
focus on making beer, focus on trying to market and grow the business
yeah,
rather than
For
just
sure.
bartending a lot,
so
which,
Working on your
so
business
we were
instead of
back
in your
to
business.
doing everything again, which
Right.
that's what you got to do, and working through the pivots and trying to stay on top of everything all the time. That's just stressful. Um,
Yeah.
we were we were just we had we put our beer, we package it in bottles. The beer that we package into bottles is generally higher alcohol. So we do lower alcohol stuff, but generally that's just on tap. And so we had just gotten to the point where we were at a beer bar and a couple of retail places, but didn't have a bottler, a mechanical
yeah, I
bottler.
was hand bottling every single bottle.
Right.
So it was 5 minutes a bottle,
Been there.
So when somebody says, "Hey, can we have a case of that?" We're like, "Sure,
Wonderful.
I'll see you in an hour." you know, um, right?
Yep, like
And
I had the lever one.
Oh, the level one.
but
Okay,
so
gotcha.
so
Yeah,
as we're looking to pivot to get things to the curb for people and package stuff up and try to get it to more retail and things like that, that it just took a little bit more time. Fortunately, we had it because we weren't always able to even serve from the
right. We,
bar,
we
but
weren't bartending
yeah.
anymore.
Right.
But anyway, so there were some things that were certainly a pivot, and then I mean, COVID's not over, as you and I know well. It's still happening, and it's still affecting how people engage and go out. I think there's a deep relaxation from where we were,
For sure.
and
For
with
sure.
vaccines and things like that make people feel a lot more comfortable with going out. But it's been 2.5 years, and there's still a pandemic out there, and
Yeah,
so
we still have folks walk in wearing masks,
yeah,
Right.
and so of course that means that you can't measure it, but inherently there've got to be a few folks who are like, I just don't feel comfortable yet, so they don't even go
Right.
out at
Well,
all.
we actually have
Of
a
course.
few of regulars. I mean, it's hard to say regulars when they came in the first year and a half, and then, but that also leaves us in a spot where, as a baby brewery, right, when we're just starting to get the facts and figures and the data and trying to do the plotting of where are we going next, we got into this what seemed like it was going to be endless loop of, you know, protecting everybody and making sure that we were creating the safest, cleanest, healthiest interactions, things like that. So that was a huge focus. I think we did well, and I think that, I mean, we had a little bit more investment that happened, so we were able to weather things, from our standpoint, without worrying too much about the whole fact that, now we need to buy more bottles and, a bottling machine. We did buy that.
Well, and
And
that's the thing. Basically,
so,
at a time when our revenue got cut off by the COVID shutdown, we basically needed to write some big checks
yeah, yeah,
because we
Right.
needed to get a better way to bottle more beer,
right.
and we also
Of
just
course.
needed to get more bottles, which are not free.
No.
And we hadn't previously had a need to have that much of them in stock, and all of a sudden we had to have a lot. And so, hey, we lost our revenue. Let's write some big checks.
I did at the very beginning, though, make very
Perfect timing.
public from Burns Family Artisan Ales perspective that we were fortunate as a business because we had beers in barrels, in tanks, in stainless that was aging and was intended to age. We had next
Right.
year's beers ready, and very much encouraged people, go drain those tanks from the people who've got, all of that 3 to 5 to 7% hoppy beer that they've got to get rid
The
of, or
clock is ticking fast
they
on
have to
that stuff.
dump.
Right.
So
We don't want our friends to have to just dump all their beer.
so it was
Yeah.
actually
That
kind of
drink fresh stuff. Yeah.
a cool, interesting way for us to have a different rapport with the brewing community around us too. So that was, you know, just little silver lining pieces of doing our business that, you didn't expect to be able to get those smiles about when you're like, oh my God, there's who knows, the world's going to end here,
Right.
but we were able to make it. People supported us and continue to support us through all of that. I think we did it with enough grace that people appreciated that and saw, maybe a little bit more integrity out of us. So
Right.
again, building the brand, it just more opportunity to build the brands. We did spend the first 6 7 months doing a nightly, really really badly unprofessionally produced Facebook Live for 15 minutes.
Yeah,
So
but it was
Okay.
7 days a week, every day of the month.
every day at seven
Right.
o'clock
So
Mountain Standard.
as a result, it was not carefully thought out or planned. But we were just trying to maintain
Yeah.
Just
rapport
winging it.
with what
Right.
had been over the past few months. We had started to see some rapid growth and interest and enthusiasm from our customers, and many more customers. And we didn't want to lose that connection, at least as much as we could
Gotcha.
avoid that happening.
Smart.
So we tried to do it every single day, which was great for a while.
Sometimes I was like April Fool's Day. I just started reading out of a joke book. I mean, sometimes we were really stretching. Everybody got to see me dance once. That was interesting.
I mean, yeah, I know. Like I joked after that no one had to go through the disappointment of seeing me dance, which was, I think, a win for everyone.
Right.
But then after a few months of that, we kind of ran out of stuff to say. 7 days a week. It's even for
Right.
people who are talkative. It's amazing how fast you run out of stuff to say. Um,
It was a good
and,
training
Right.
exercise, though.
right.
Keep our comments to 15 minutes.
Yep. So
Instead of
anyway, we
nudge.
pulled the plug on that, and hopefully we were able to, at least to a degree, maintain some connection with some of those new customers, which is what we were hoping for. And of course, I think also everyone was hoping that
Right.
COVID would not last as seriously as long as it did. Of course, when we started doing that, we
Right.
were hoping it would just be, well, we didn't really believe it, but I think everyone was hoping it wouldn't last too long. Um, and once we started to realize, oh, this is going to be a while, well, we don't have that much to say. So,
Right. So, your brewery focuses on high alcohol beers.
That is
That's kind
that
of
is, I
like
think you can say,
your
our
guys'
niche and our
niche.
specialty.
Yes.
Um,
Right.
we, you know,
Why? What made you focus on that? And
High
is
octane
that
Wayne.
something you actually personally like?
well, I think it's fair to say it's multiple factors, and yes, we do personally like those beers. That upfront
Same.
caveat
Same.
that we've
Same.
always kept plus or minus half of all of our taps as we believe anyway, very well crafted, well balanced, flavorful but sessionable beers. Um, I got the 99 GABF gold medal for German Pils. So that's a recipe that we make round the year. And so we
And
we
you
do.
made
Okay.
the GABF gold winning American IPA.
It was actually World Beer Cup even.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I know.
Best of the world then. Fine.
And so we make
Ooh,
beers
pardon
like
me.
that, right? That we're confident they're well done and everything. But of course, if say you've got a lovely Pilsner and you've got a lovely 15% barrel aged Imperial Stout, what are people going to talk about more? Most of the time, they're going to say, "Wow, that Imperial Stout." And so we definitely, like as Laura said,
Yeah.
that's like our niche. That's what people get uh, notice more and remember us for more. I had experience doing this going really back to my homebrew days back in the late 80s. My homebrewing buddy and I were fascinated by strong beers at the time. So that goes to something you mentioned, is it something that you just really enjoy and are interested in? And absolutely, yes, that is certainly
Hmm.
part of it. And then along with that, as I transitioned into brewing professionally, I worked at several breweries over the years where they supported me on doing very uncommonly strong beers, typically as a once or twice a year specialty, but they
Right.
supported me making those beers as barrel aging started to become a thing in the late 90s, because like bourbon barrel aging a beer really wasn't a thing until the mid late 90s. Um,
Right.
So, and I went to brewing school with the guy who developed that. He was the first guy to develop it, as far as I know. Greg Hall, the Goose Island owner for, Bourbon County Stout. I went to school with him, and I remember
Right.
him talking with me
Awesome.
about it, and it was like, you know, um, I'm thinking about doing this thing. And it's like, wow, I've never heard of anyone doing that before. And he's like, well, neither have I, but we think it might work and be pretty cool. And that kind of deal. It's funny, nowadays you hear
Sure
about Bourbon
enough.
County Imperial Stout or Bourbon Barrel Aged Imperial Stout of any
Right.
kind. And the idea of, I don't know, is that going to work? It is a strange thing to hear. But back then, no one was doing it. So it
Right.
was like, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And but I started doing that kind of stuff, and I was supported by some of the breweries I worked at to do stuff like that, and it was reasonably well received. And what we started to see, and this was around the time I started to get to know Laura in the late aughts and early teens, was there was a market for it. And obviously, it was only a subset of the craft beer market, but there was definitely a market for folks who really thought those things were interesting, kind of above and beyond any other style of beer. And I think you could probably say that for any section of craft beer. But that was an area that not many folks did, and people often struggled to do well because
Yeah.
high alcohol fermentations are tough. And
And
so
that's, I
we've
mean, that's where I wanted to interject. Is one of the
sure,
things that I think with practice, right, over time, but one of the things that Wayne, um, his his gift in doing that is to create beers that aren't attenuated, go high alcohol just for the sake of going high alcohol. He's he's a yeast whisperer, and figures out how to, stops the fermentation when it needs to be stopped. I mean, we've had several experiences where we've gotten a 13% beer where we thought we were going to get a 20% beer, or stuff like that, where this is just where the beer wants to be. And
Well,
I
and the
think
flavor balance is great at that point.
at that point,
So even though you get more cool points for having a higher alcohol number among the beer lovers,
Right.
ultimately, does it really taste great?
yeah,
You want to have
And do
that
you
great
want to have
taste.
another one?
Yeah.
yeah. And
Even if it's not a wise idea to have
course.
another one.
and balance, I think, is the biggest thing. That is,
It's always a wise idea.
balance is the biggest thing. I mean, one of the things that we can't market is the statements that we hear regularly, which is, oh, well, that didn't taste like X. It tasted, a good 5% lower than that, or whatever.
In
I
terms
was
of alcohol by
expecting,
volume, it didn't
right,
taste like this alcohol by volume. It
right.
tasted like less
Right.
than that.
You
Gotcha.
really can't market that very well.
Right.
Hey, we've got beer that doesn't taste like.
Like it's as strong as it is. It's just
Yeah.
a weird
Right.
statement.
But those comments are made regularly, and that's the cool part about the interaction with people and in that niche of beer. So we know we're doing good.
Right.
Sure.
I do kind of love that though. When I do have a strong beer and it's like, oh wow, it's doesn't taste like it. It doesn't taste like a 15%er. It kind of tastes like, I taste more flavor than I do the alcohol, the booziness. So, I mean, I kind of look forward to that a lot.
We think most people
Being
do.
a business owner, yeah, absolutely. Being a business owner, there's a lot that comes with it. What are some qualities you both possess that make you good business owners?
We tend not to give up, like, ever. Which I suppose.
Good.
I mean,
It's good. Be
that's
resilient.
it's definitely gotten us through a lot of stuff. So yeah, we just tend just simply not to take. I mean, okay, we do take no for an answer, but it's more like, how do we get around that? How do we get to the other side? And we butt heads a
With
lot.
each other, sure.
Yeah. So
And what are the odds? We're also married, so
right.
There you go.
So I think that's the biggest one, is just really the tenacity that it takes to be a business owner, because it can be quite scary. It can be quite depressing. It can be, and then just being able to pick out those little nuggets of, wow, this was a good spot.
yeah.
While I
This
know I
really
have
worked.
Right.
20 other million things that I could be doing better right now. Let's take that one thing and celebrate it for a hot second before we move on.
So yeah, I mean, I think that like she's sort of dancing around a topic too, that we both lean in the direction of perfectionism, which that's if ever there's a double-edged sword, that's certainly one. It encourages doing stuff well and consistently, and it can also encourage, what's the old line? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, or whatever. So it can also encourage making mistakes as well, or at least tactical errors. But I think also,
Right.
part of it as well is that there are an awful lot of great brewers doing great things at an awful lot of great breweries in this country at this point. I don't even remember where the count is now. I think it's 9 or 10,000 breweries. I who knows where we're at
Right.
this point, but it's a
I think it's
lot. I
about
mean, for
9.
someone
Yeah.
who grew up and started to get into the industry at a time when the idea of a
With a
thousand
handful.
breweries was a decade away,
Right.
the idea
Right.
of nearly 10,000 breweries was so far beyond imaginable. I mean, I lived through the bubble burst in the late 90s in craft beer, the so-called bubble burst, whatever. I mean, but there were some problems then. And one of the classic statements that was made in the late 90s was, Well, the problem is there's just too many breweries and too many SKUs, stock keeping units, too many brands on the shelves. It's just way, way, way too many. There's almost
Right.
1,000 breweries in the country. They've all got a bunch of beers. There's no way that the customer wants that many beers. And then fast forward to today,
Yeah,
while,
right.
when I
Fast
hear the
forward to
same
9,000. Yeah.
same challenges being stated today, and I mean, who knows? There very well may be a place where that's starting to really push the limit on what is a reasonable amount of brands out on the shelves. I, having lived through that in the 90s, am always cautious about the whatever you want to call it, like the doomsaying of, oh, there's just too many. Well, maybe there are too many, and also maybe actually 20 years from now we're going to look and say 10,000 breweries, that's nothing, we've got 50,000 now or whatever. I mean, I'm not
Yeah,
predicting that at
right.
all, but
Yeah, right.
that kind of thing can happen. And so having some
Absolutely
history and
possible.
perspective in the industry, and it's my career. I'm not someone who has another very successful and perhaps somewhat lucrative career and then decided to do something else, but I've got that to fall back on if it just doesn't work. I could I mean, this is my
Gotcha.
career.
Yeah.
If in a worst case scenario this business didn't work out, what would I do? Well, I would go to work for another brewery. That's what I would do. So there's
Right.
also, I
There you
think, an
go.
aspect that plays to Laura's first statement of us being very determined to push through difficulties. It's also because this is what we do. This is our career. This is our
Right.
field. It's not like I could go back to being a mechanical engineer or something like that. So,
Right.
so that
It's also a passion too. So.
absolutely yes. So there are a bunch of things
Right.
that play into us. I think being able to do that. I mean, I guess other things that are all important. We haven't very important things that we haven't touched on is well. Okay, you've either got to be good at doing a lot of just multitasking in 100 ways at once, or you've got to be good at delegating, and or perhaps both. So bookkeeping and
Right.
accounting, and human resources, and employee management, and a lot of things like that. That
Kind
maybe
of a
if you were working
jack
as
of
a
all
brewer
trades.
might not have been wheelhouse for you, or more
Right.
specifically me. I didn't spend much time doing
There you
bookkeeping
go.
and accounting earlier in my brewing career.
Yeah. No, that's not my specialty. Is there a moment that kind of sticks out for you both that stands out as a moment of success to you? Basically, that you kind of like stood back and you're like, things are going in the right direction. This is a good thing. And
Um,
also, how do you define success?
that's a really good question. I don't know. I just wait for myself to feel good. I don't know. Yeah, there. I mean,
Success.
there. Right. There are markers. I like. I do, and I'll reveal it. But Pete Slosberg from Pete's Wicked um, would say, "I knew I'd made it when I saw a Pete's Wicked bottle cap in the gutter." Yeah, bad people littering, whatever. Um,
Yeah.
our
Somebody drinking it on the street.
the
Yeah,
thing,
but the brand was out there enough that people were even just throwing bottle
Of
caps in the
course.
gutter.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
So
Right.
we do really specialty beer, and the people who are most excited about it are often collectors, traders. Um,
Nice.
so my my marker, which we have hit, was I know we've made it when there's a ISO in search of on the secondary market. Um, so it's we've gone beyond our name has gotten into people's awareness. They have become aware of the beer that we do and the quality that we have, and we are
Right.
playing with the big boys, right? Um,
Right.
and the people that I watch that we use as market research for, you know, determining how our niche is moving along. So, and we've reached that. So that was actually, and it was within this past year. So that was exciting, you know. How we define success. I mean, I think as an entrepreneur, the one of the problems with entrepreneurs is there is no like actual measurement of success. There's always, oh, well, that was great. What's the next thing? I think that's just a classic piece of being an entrepreneur. So, how do we define success? Well, we met that measurement, so I set a different one. Um, you know, and yeah, they're tangible
Right.
bits. You know, how many people show up at this particular dinner, or you know, things like that. They're all small measuring sticks, but you know, then once you reach it, there's always something after that. You know, you celebrate what you had, but there is no ultimate. You know, whew, we made it.
Well, like, so here's a perfect example. I spent
Right.
almost 20 years brewing professionally in Michigan at various different places. And one of my best experiences there, one of the best companies I worked for sure, and a personal friend, Bell's Brewery, Larry Bell. I remember
Bells.
Larry
Yeah.
making the comment to me, and I didn't see him that much because I was working a lot of third shift. And Larry works hard and long, or well, he did until last December when he sold the company, I guess. But he worked hard and long,
Right.
but he didn't spend a lot of third shift at the production plant, so I didn't see him a ton. But I do remember him making the comment that, and this was a brewery that was doing like 200,000 barrels a year at the time, which is pretty darn big for a craft brewery. And
Yes.
he made the comment, well, the thing is, when you see price points for beers out on shelves, whether in six packs of bottles or cans or whatever, what people tend to not think about sometimes is the economy of scale that some of these brands have. And so someone was asking about, because I think we were going into Texas at that time. And so they were talking about a company like Shiner, relatively well known. Shiner, yeah,
Bells was
Bell's,
going into Texas.
Bell's was going into Texas. And so folks were
Right.
talking about brands in Texas that would be competing with Bell's. And so Shiner Bach was one of those brands that was like, it's not Bud Miller Coors, so
Mm-hmm.
it's crafty-ish. And Larry made the comment. He said, well, yeah, and the thing is, they've got some different situations with their infrastructure and their economy of scale that help them do stuff at a better cost than we can. And it's kind of funny. You got a brewery that's doing that kind of volume, and yet still, right? Like to Laura's point of, the goalposts keep moving. You're trying to all of a sudden now you're trying to
Right.
compete with Sierra Nevada, and Sierra Nevada is much bigger than Bell's, and so etc. And so it's that kind of a thing. The goalposts always keep moving for you.
Right. And you talk about the owner of Bells. Who do you think's influenced you? I'm sure you've met tons of brewers, tons of people in the industry, but who do you think's influenced you both the most?
I mean, I think there are a handful of good candidates there, and two different people at Bell's though would be very strong ones. I mean, first of all, Larry himself, but also, I mean, and certainly in
Right.
Michigan craft beer industry where I grew up and also grew up in craft beer, he was super influential. And then also the guy who at this point for over 20 years has been the guy in charge of trying to make all the pieces work, a guy named John Mallett, who for folks who enjoy reading nerdy books about brewing stuff, he wrote the book about malt. He's an instructor at the Siebel
Okay.
Institute. He's got a list of things that he's involved with and works on, in addition to also being in charge of trying to operate a company the size of Bell's. So he's got a lot of stuff on his plate. But his uh, insight, his intelligence, and his ability to both like focus as well as multitask at the same time, and always just be on top of safety and quality control in the product, has always been a direct
Right.
inspiration to me going back at this point for 30 or more years. So those would be for sure.
Well,
Gotcha.
and I basically, I mean, John Mallett would be at the top of several lists that I have, but definitely, and just the kindness and the apparent ability to flow. I'm sure he has his moments too, but yeah, and there are different people for different aspects of what I do as well. So those people who are in charge of marketing or social media or various things like that. But I've been really fortunate in my learning in this industry, which has gone on for 12 years. And my good fortune has been that I've been able to sit down at the table with the names, you know, Chris White of White
Right.
Labs and John Mallett and Larry Bell. And, I mean, one of our first states was sitting in Larry Bell's office drinking absinthe. So, I didn't give that
And,
away,
and,
Larry.
and Bell's beer
Um,
too.
but I've been able
Sounds like a great
to
time.
get to know these people um, who have already built their skill with grace and learn from that.
Right.
And that's super awesome. And there are also plenty of people that are inspirational to me, brewers at some of these breweries that are around us in Denver. People who works in our tap room, who's an inspiration to me, and that's Beth Walter, to call
the,
people out.
the
And
famous Falling Rock Tap House
yeah,
that she worked
so
at.
um, so
Gotcha.
I there are a lot of heroes in my life. So yeah.
Cool. And what does the future look like for Burns Family Artisan Ales? Where do you see the future of your brewery going?
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
I think we actually have a really bright future, that things are starting to, those goalposts are moving, right? So,
Right.
we are
Yeah.
we are um, looking to get out into overseas. France and Ireland are places that have been asking for our beer. Do pop-ups around the country, kind of get our feet into a little bit more national distribution, so that people can get to know our beer. We find that actually um, there we have a very strong national presence that, of course, is always good when you don't distribute to those places. But that's part of that.
people talk
Right.
about
That's
us.
Yeah,
great.
that's part of that trading thing.
Right.
There are a lot
Yeah.
of
Right.
people
Yeah.
who we're their first stop
Beer
when they
exchange.
come in from out of town. And those are the people that are connecting us with, you should do a pop up at this tap room and go to these couple of retailers and things like that, and let me help you get there. Um, and so that's really, next 3 years kind of, what we're looking at there. And I think it'd be nice to have a 10-year plan, but COVID did teach us something. Um, so
Gotcha.
so
Yeah.
3 years, get our footing there, and then look at how we
Where
can
does it
produce more.
where does
And
it make the most sense to focus our efforts, our attention, our growth, our presence at various publicity events, so say beer festivals,
Right.
right? That's an obvious way to try to
Gotcha.
get
Yeah.
out in front of new people, as well as various bars where you get your beer on tap. It's not that you so much make a lot of money selling kegs of beer to a bar, but you you don't lose money. You make a little bit of money, and you get in front of hopefully very enthusiastic beer customers who haven't tried your beer before. So some of those kinds of things, but then being able to having taken another year, two, three worth of experience in terms of however it turns out, and then seeing where it makes sense to really try to keep pushing ourselves out more. And or well, okay, so one thing I remember hearing, which I thought was really interesting, a place out of Cali, the Brewery, so top notch
Yes.
brewery,
Okay.
and they have some definite parallels with our type of strong beer portfolio in terms of the beer that they send out in the
Yes.
market.
For sure.
And I remember very clearly reading a piece of an interview with the owner there and making the comment. It was either him or the head salesperson, one or the other, that they were saying that most folks will say that the way to go is to be local and deep in your presence and your distribution. Because, of course, you've got an advantage when you are very local because there's an inherent extra, like if everything else is a toss up, but one brewery is a half mile away and the other one's from 2 states away, well, I'll go to the one that's from local. And they
Right.
said, it's funny because we're kind of the opposite of that. Our plan is instead of deep and local, our plan is shallow and wide. But that's because they're putting out beers like Black Tuesday that are 18% barrel aged imperial stouts in
Yeah.
bottles and such. And
Well, we
so,
appreciate those people who drink them every day.
right. But
There aren't a
they're,
lot of them.
yeah, if you only go local, it's hard to
It's hard.
get
It's
too
hard to
deep.
do
You
it.
can't go too deep because there aren't thousands of people locally who are going to buy Black Tuesday, no matter how great of a beer it is.
Who are drinking heavy beers.
And
Right.
so that's
Right.
like one of those interesting little things. It depends on your niche and what makes sense for you, and then what the market is at the time, too, right? 10 years ago or 20 years ago, saying, I want to go all in on craft lager might have been looked at as, boy, that seems strange because IPAs. And now, of course, if you're saying that, you're like, well, of course, because that's one of the cool new things. So,
Yeah.
it's
It's the
the
thing to do.
goalposts always move. Only constant is
For sure.
change.
It's ever changing. Craft
Yes.
beer ever changing. Gotta love that. I mean, like, who would have thought? Like hazies would be like the biggest thing. But hey, everybody's always like, "Oh,
Right.
look at that! Look how clear this beer is! I could see right through it." Now hazies are like the things to drink. So
Look how I can't see
you
through
never know.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you
And
predicted that 25 years ago, it
right,
wouldn't have,
look, I
no
can't
one
see
would have
through
said
it. This is
that.
delicious. Right. So if somebody had come to you, which I'm sure they do all the time, and asked you for advice on opening their own brewery, what would you tell them?
Um, yeah, learn, learn. If you're gonna do a brewery, then you should have already learned from somebody who knows how to brew, and you should have already spent a decent amount of time doing some kind of following and shadowing of people in a brewery that you respect. Um,
Right.
it doesn't necessarily matter that they need to be long time on the earth or people that we hang out with, but yeah, shadowing is a really super important part of learning, and don't expect it all to be great. Just keep trying to figure things out. Even if you have a huge amount of success like right away, don't get complacent. Things like that. So yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree with all of that. And one thing I would say, and this comes from previous experience with, because I think most often folks who are considering the possibility of trying to transition into opening their own place, there's basically two regions they come from. Either they're folks working at a brewery currently and thinking, you know, I'd really like to do my own thing. Or most often, other than that, I would say it's homebrewers who have some skill and experience and understanding of the brewing process and the raw ingredients and what's necessary to make beer. And they're thinking, you know, very often I think, you know, my job maybe pays me pretty well, but I really don't enjoy it. And I'd much rather do something that
Right.
I enjoy more. And I love brewing beer,
Right.
and it seems like the community is great and all of that. And both of those are very fair things, but I think especially for the folks who are coming from the perspective of, or from the place of not currently working as a professional brewer, getting some experience working as a professional brewer. You know, it doesn't mean you have to do it for 10 or 20 years before you try to open a place, in my humble opinion. But I think probably, you know, and pick a number out of the air, but say, you know, work for at least a year as a professional brewer. And I would say this for two main reasons. One is it still as fun for you when it's your job, not your hobby? Because of course your hobby is fun.
Right.
I mean, and it doesn't matter, like, if
Of
something goes
course.
wrong with your hobby, well, okay, I made a 5 gallon batch of beer and it absolutely didn't work, and I'm just going to dump the whole thing. Well, okay, you're out 20 or 40
Right.
bucks. It doesn't really matter. But if you have that happen with a batch of beer at a brewery, that
Large
kind of
scale.
thing is a whole different animal. And so then as a
Right.
result, the stress and anxiety and pressure to get everything right, in my experience, feels
Right.
distinctly different from doing it as a hobby. And then the other thing I would say as well, this is for me spending a fair amount of my life working in the greater Detroit area. And of course, that's part of the reason for the high octane Wayne nickname, because of the car industry there. But there were an awful lot of
Right.
folks among the homebrewing community there who were, and I'm sure still are, engineers in the auto industry. Very sharp people, well educated, and very good at working with gadgets on their homebrew system. Also, and this comes directly from a guy who won a homebrew contest, and the prize was he got to brew the recipe on the commercial brewery. The homebrew, the club was at the brewery, so he got to make the
Right.
beer with us at the brewery.
Okay.
And this guy was a middle-aged, pudgy guy who worked at a desk because, you know, and he had a wife, he had kids, he had a house, and he needed to realize really quickly that that process of shoveling the grain out of the mash tun, and of course
Oh,
we were making a barley
physically.
wine
Oh,
because
it's
he
physical.
had won with a strong beer,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of grain, and he realized very quickly,
Yeah.
oh man, I just can't do this. Can you finish this for me? You know, sure, man, that's fine. But what he realized is, boy, if I want to do this as a career, I've got to get in better shape. And I was like, well, you know,
Yeah.
I don't want to be mean, but I was, in my mind, I was like, yes, you do. You know, you don't
Yeah.
actually see a lot of
For
professional
sure.
brewers who are sedentary looking. They may or may not be skinny, but they're generally pretty
Right.
physical people. And it's because the job is pretty
Of course.
physical. And that's something I think a lot of
Yeah.
folks don't realize. So it could be a real concern for someone who wants to get in and do their own place, and then they don't kind of realize what they're getting into. And that's another area where work a year as a brewer will help you to realize, do I really want to do this?
Right. For sure. All good advice. Thank you. And did you happen to have a funny story for us?
I actually did come up with one.
Did you? Did
Yeah,
you? Because
yeah.
I have one too.
Oh, well,
We'll see
it
how
is.
long yours is, and then I'll pipe it.
Okay, so this one is actually pretty brief, and it carries some
Brief
extra
and
Okay.
mean generally don't go hand in hand.
it carries some extra funny because the people in the story are pretty well known in the craft beer industry. So I'm going to, with apologies up front to Vinny and Natalie Salurzo of Russian River. I was hanging out at World Beer
Russian
Cup
River.
judging with John Mallett, which is how I get to know all these people because he knows all these people, and several other really well-known people in the industry. And it just so had Vinny and Natalie were part of this group of 6 or 8 folks. And it just so happened that the way the conversation went, I'm chatting with Natalie, Vinny's talking with some other folks, and I forget just how we got to it, but she, we were talking about the experience of growing up in the industry and like we're not young people anymore, we're middle-aged people and this sort of thing. And Natalie's like, well, that's true, but also I think we're really lucky. I mean, Vinny is gorgeous, don't you think? And I was kind of like, I'm not the best judge of that, but he seems like a really handsome guy. And she's like, yeah, and he's got a gorgeous ass.
Yeah.
Straight from Natalie's mouth.
Yeah.
Sorry, Natalie.
Right? Yeah.
But it was hilarious.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to say to that.
Yeah. Well, sure. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, that's my story.
Yeah.
Did you want to go your story?
Sure.
That's all right.
I don't know that I can top that one. So you get to get a call from Natalie, though.
Yeah, right. She'd be like, that was a private story. Oh, she's so sweet.
Yeah. I'm gonna get you. So I have a little segment called Quick Fire 5. It's 5 quick questions, beer related. Ready?
Ready?
Okay. Somebody comes into your brewery. What's one of the beers you recommend they try?
That's a good one. I think everybody who's behind the bar says the same thing. What beers do you like? We have a great tap list that is very broad. We have Belgians, we have strong beer, we have, very fun beers, like a beer that tastes like lemon meringue pie and, things like that. So yeah. And I always steer away from, there's the whole like, oh yeah, what's your favorite beer? And I'm like, dude, these are my babies. Like, I'm not going to talk in front of them. One of them's going to like hit me or something. Anyway, so yeah, what's your answer?
Well, if you had to pick just one,
right?
Which one would you pick?
Well, and I guess that always goes to, if you want to hit something that most people talk about, it's going to be your barrel-aged Imperial Stout, and get a small pour. It's 4 ounces, right? Take a little bit of time with it. If you want something that showcases how classic brewing happens with Wayne, then get our pills. It's the 1999 GABF gold medal winning recipe, not beer.
It's a much fresher batch.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Gotcha.
certified Cicerone talking there. She can't make herself just say one beer. Right. I will say one beer with the caveat that basically my take is the same as hers, but I'll just say the German Pils.
German Pils. Gotcha. If you could collaborate with any other brewery on a beer, who would it be?
One that, and we're kicking around this idea right now, actually, that I would consider myself incredibly honored to be able to try to make happen. A guy named Peter Buchert, pretty well known in the industry at least. He was in charge of New Belgium for decades. And
Rodenbach before that.
And he was at Rodenbach before he was in charge of New Belgium. And then about 5 years ago, in fact, I think this was their 5-year anniversary, he opened up a small place of his own just outside of Fort Collins that focuses entirely on barrel-aged wild mixed sour beers. And so my thought is to do a super high alcohol content wild mixed barrel-aged sour with Peter Buchert, who, right, the whole reason basically that sour beer exists in America, and also just a super nice and incredibly smart guy. So that would be a huge honor for me if we can make that all come together.
All right. Favorite style of beer?
Oh, West Coast IPA. Yeah. Hop Slam is actually my favorite beer.
Oh, Hop Slam's great.
Yeah.
I'll pick the left field one. Bamberg Route Beer. I've actually got a lot of favorites, but
All right.
that's like, yeah, I love that, and it's
Yeah,
one that
me too.
probably almost no one picks. So
Gotcha. Favorite name for a beer? I'm sorry. Favorite name you've come up with for one of your beers?
Oh dear. Do you have a favorite name?
I'm trying to. I mean, there are a lot of names that Laura is almost entirely responsible for the names because she's just way, way better at that than I am. But so there are actually a lot that I really like. But as a knee jerk off the top of my head, I'm going to go with the Ship of Theseus because we basically use an identical recipe to the beer that I won a bunch of medals with at another brewery
With permission.
We're
Yeah.
very good friends with them. And the name Ship of Theseus is a reference to a philosophical thought experiment that is the basis for intellectual property law. So it ties back to the fact that
Well,
we're
there you
using the
go.
same recipe.
Yeah.
I know you guys didn't see it, but my brain just exploded in my head. So,
That's awesome.
and you have one keg of beer to hold you over for a 2-week quarantine. What beer are you choosing? Basically your desert island beer.
It's MP. That's our
The-
German
the
Pils.
Post, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were to
Okay.
say my own beer, I think I would say that, or maybe like the 20% bourbon barrel aged imperial stout, just depending on how drunk I wanted to be. Or I could say Orval.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not my beer, but a keg of Orval would
Yeah.
be awesome.
Whichever. Well, there you go. Well, guys, that's all I got for you.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much
This
for
was
being
fun.
on.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. I'm Mike Hurton for the Brew World Order podcast, here with Wayne Burns and Laura Worley, co-founders of Burns Family Artisan Ale in Denver, Colorado. Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.